welcome to the MDGSA, and also remember our elections are in April. Take it away.
All right. Yeah, I'm going to try to stay static, but also have you see me, Dave, but also try to be in this other computer screen area over here. So I'm going to do my best. Okay. All right, great. So my name is Sarah Huffman, and I'm a postdoc in the Center for Communication Excellence in the Grad College. And we give a variety of seminars on different strategies that you might want to incorporate while you're writing different sections of your research article. We also do other workshops, and I can let you know more about those later if you'd like more information. But today specifically, we're going to be talking about the discussion and conclusion section of the research article. Okay, so just today's agenda. Everybody can see this okay? Does the light bother? Is that all right? Okay. So today we're just gonna go over first a general description of discussion and conclusion sections, the importance of these sections, what we're gonna call communicative goals of discussion and conclusions, and then some specific writing strategies that you guys can employ in order to achieve these goals. And throughout this, we're going to be integrating specific examples from actual published discourse to help illustrate our points. So our goal specifically is to provide you with some effective guidelines for writing discussions and conclusions, and hopefully you'll be able to use these and apply these as you write your next discussion or conclusion section, and you develop your argument therein. So this graphic right here that hopefully everyone can see basically illustrates what comes before the discussion and conclusion section. Has anyone else seen such an hourglass shape for a research article before? Okay. In composition and discourse studies, this hourglass shape is used a lot to represent what theoretically is happening throughout the research article. So in the introduction sections, you start from a broad base. You start by contextualizing, by drawing on a lot of general background, referencing a lot of previous research, and then you slowly narrow down to the specific niche that you're going to target. Okay, this is happening within the introduction. And then in the methods, basically you're still drawing on external sources, but throughout the methods and results, this is really the most narrow part conceptually of your research article or thesis or dissertation, because this is your work, right? This is what you did, and these are your findings. Once we get to the discussion and conclusion, we start to broaden back out. And what happens is you not only try to make meaning of the results within your study, you're trying to make meaning of the results within the particular discipline that you're in. So again, you're drawing on external sources. You're doing a lot of referencing, comparing and contrasting maybe your results with previous results. You want to make meaning to figure out where to go, what future recommendations to make based on this particular study and your findings. So basically you're discussing the how, why, and what results were obtained, but then you're expanding on those. So first we're going to start by talking about the purpose and importance of the discussion and conclusion section. So why is this section so important? I invite lots of audience participation, especially with such a small group.
A lot of people don't read the results.
Well, okay. Yeah, unfortunately, sometimes people only read certain parts of the research article. Hey, we're all probably guilty of it. We have to go through a lot of different resources, and we need to target specifically what is relevant. So people may not have read the results or methods or introduction. Why else would it be important?
We're trying to draw the connection between your results and the broader field. Yeah, exactly. Like, we are not just doing research, conducting research in a vacuum, right? We're doing this as part of building knowledge within our discipline, so other people will understand and be able to build upon the results or findings that we're contributing. So typically, what kinds of information do you expect to see when you read discussions and conclusions? And we're collapsing these together today because they have similar rhetorical functions.
So what kind of information do you expect to see? Okay, exactly. Significant findings from the study. So they're highlighting maybe significant findings.
Applicable theory.
Okay, applicable theory. So again, this is all part of kind of drawing on this external body of knowledge.
What should be,
Go ahead.
what should be careful next time if you want to redo the study? Like say like some implications.
Yeah, implications, limitations, maybe. All of these potential considerations for future researchers, maybe even specific recommendations for future research too, right? So we may have potentially written ineffective discussions or conclusions before. What do these look like? We may have read these as well. What would be some characteristics of something that would be an ineffective discussion or conclusion?
Very vague.
Vague, okay, absolutely.
Doesn't expand upon the results.
Mm-hmm. Yep, it doesn't expand on the results. I mean, basically hitting on these ideas that we've already mentioned, maybe it doesn't attempt to draw further recommendations or implications or highlight the limitations for transparency purposes. So there's a lot of ways that it can be an ineffective discussion or conclusion. So basically in these sections, we're providing an extended analysis through being evaluative and interpretive. This is our perspective. We're expanding the meaning of the results outside of just the reported study and further into the discipline. We're indicating how results add or relate to current knowledge in the field, so how our results are situated within what currently exists in the field. We're showing the value and importance of the new findings, and we're setting up for this convincing climax for our scientific argument, which we've been developing throughout the research paper. And please feel free to interrupt me if you are here or distance, if you have any questions, okay? So how do we move towards this climax where we're talking about this, our research or our scientific argument that we're trying to really drive home in these last sections of the paper? Well, good conclusions and good discussion sections together don't simply restate the major findings or make deductions, but they actually fill particular communicative purposes. And today we're going to talk about some strategies that you guys can use to hopefully help fulfill these goals. Okay, so we're breaking down at this point the major goals. We're going to see these in color-coded format. There's 4 major goals of discussions and conclusions. And this is based, I should note that this is based on empirical evidence from a lot of discourse analysis that's been done across the disciplines. So what we were seeing basically, I was on a team and we did an analysis of 900 research articles over the course of several years, and these were basically our conclusions. We found this happening across disciplines that conduct empirical research. That's another thing that I should mention. So we're not talking about the humanities. You won't see examples from history or music here, but you will see examples from, you know, basically any field that we research conducts empirical research. So what you can't see here, it's faded out a little bit. These are some major goals of introduction sections. The reason that you're seeing this flip-flop is that the same thing that happens in an introduction section happens in reverse, typically in discussion and conclusion sections. So it might be helpful to think about it conceptually in that way. So in introduction sections, we establish some kind of a knowledge territory, and then we slowly identify a specific niche that we're going to target, and then we show how our work is going to address this niche. The exact same thing is happening, except kind of in reverse in discussions and conclusions. So we may reestablish the territory a little bit. We start to frame our principal findings, and then we kind of reshape the territory by drawing on external sources, and then we establish new territory. So there's this really broadening out type of aspect that we see in these sections. So it's basically what we're calling here a mirror image of the introduction. So these are the specific goals that we're going to talk about today. First, reestablishing the territory, framing principal findings, reshaping the territory, and then establishing additional territory. So this very busy text, I don't expect you to read. This is a lot of text. This is just an example of a discussion, compacted discussion and conclusion section. Some parts have been removed. But what I've done here is color code it according to the specific communicative goals that it's achieving. So blue was the first, then red, then green, then yellow. So what you see and what we were seeing in our analysis was certain patterns that were typically occurring across different disciplines, the more discussions and conclusions we looked at. We typically saw this first goal being accomplished towards the beginning, but then again, interspersed throughout. There's not a specific formula that you have to follow, obviously, in your compositions. But we definitely see different goals being accomplished here. So first, they're setting up a little bit of context, and then they're moving on to the findings of our project, suggest something in particular. Our results support another study, or maybe negate findings from a different study. Overall, this study provided evidence that, and so you're moving on to making these broader generalizations. And then this study alerts us to the fact that, so at this point in this yellow, which is this last communicative goal, you can see the author really expanding out to try to make meaning of these findings for the field. So the first goal is about reestablishing the territory by grounding the discussion. The second, you're framing principal findings by connecting the results to some kind of disciplinary knowledge, and then reshaping the territory by redefining your knowledge in light, or current knowledge in the field in light of your knowledge, your new findings that you're contributing. And then there's this expansion of the territory by discussing the findings within the broader context of what's going on in your field. And here's just kind of a brief breakdown. We'll go through these move by move, but this is a breakdown of some of the elements you'll typically find in these goals. So in reestablishing the territory, you may include old or new theoretical or empirical information. You also may highlight the principal findings, your principal findings for discussion. You may even reiterate some study specifics. So you may even remind the reader, hey, my research questions were this. This was the objective of this study. I hypothesized that. So this is what I mean by study specifics. This was the particular, you may even highlight some of the methods that you use. And then you may move to framing the findings. So you're discussing the results in connection to the previous knowledge by explaining, by providing reasoning, interpreting, and maybe deliberating. And we're going to go over each of these throughout the discussion today. And then there's a reshaping of this territory. So this is where you update the current state of the art in this knowledge space. And you're positioning your current findings in a research space through comparison or contrast with previous literature. And then in this last goal, basically you're establishing additional territory by talking about your results in context of this broader discipline. So you're talking about any types of evaluation, like limitations, potentially. You're drawing logical conclusions from your findings. You might point to the study's significance or value in the field. And then you might even propose additional research to follow up. You may even want to, if you're conducting this as part of a long-term project, you may even want to talk about how you're following up with this research. So here's some specific language that fits within one of these particular goals. And I'd like you to take a look at this for a second and try to figure out which goal you think this adheres to. And your handout might help. I'm sorry, Dave, I haven't sent you a handout, but the handout might help. We'll get that to you later.
Okay.
Yeah. You're being very quiet.
I'm taking it all in.
Okay.
Dave, can you see the screen?
You could tilt me like a little bit more right. Yeah, that's fine. That's
good. So what about this first one? A possible reason for this result might also be, so they're speculating about the nature of the results here. Maybe a reshaping.
A framing?
Okay. Okay. Framing the findings. It would probably be framing because you're talking about the derivation of the results. So you're trying to make meaning or account for what's happening that may have caused the results. What about this one? This study will ignite the interest for follow-up research exploring blah, blah, blah.
Sounds like additional territory.
Okay, additional territory, because it's recommending some kind of a follow-up action, right? These data disagree with those of author blah, blah, blah at all. Okay, reshaping because there's some kind of a comparison contrast. And then in this study, blah, blah, blah was used to describe, investigate. So this is kind of a reminding of what the study
it's reestablishing the
set
territory.
out to accomplish, right? Reestablishing the territory.
Can
exactly.
I ask you?
Sure.
Earlier, you had said something about, if something supports or negates other studies.
Right. So that's part of this reshaping. So,
Okay. I had it under framing.
Oh, okay. Okay. I mean, you can kind of conceptually think of those in similar ways, but this is definitely a distinct characteristic of just either if you have combined results discussion sections or if you have separate discussion sections in your field. I don't know, what's more common in your discipline? Do you typically see combined results discussion or separate? Or is it both?
See both.
Okay.
More combined?
Unless you're a student of Dr. Sanders.
And it could be preferences. It could also be preferences of a journal. Some journals are highly specific about we will not take it if it's not combined, or you must designate, there must be a distinction between them.
I have a question. Some study is quantitative research method.
Okay.
So how this is going to be I mean, this is more like a reviewing data from way.
Yeah, well, this is actually highly, highly applicable to qualitative. Qualitative, quantitative, or mixed methods. So as long as you have data, these strategies are going to be useful because you still need to make meaning of them. In fact, in qualitative research, sometimes you have to go even further to make meaning of them. So the discussion part, it's a really rhetorically heavy part. So you have an argument that you have to support and bolster a lot with your evidence. And talking about how that fits within the framework of other research in the field, current knowledge in the field is also pretty important. So do most people do qualitative, or is it kind of combined in this discipline?
Or a mixed bag.
Mixed bag. Okay, great. I'm used to talking to mixed bags, so that's great. All right, but yeah, thank you for that question, and hopefully I'll be able to pinpoint some things that might be a little bit more heavily qualitative. So in this first goal, we're talking about reestablishing the territory. And this basically gives a breakdown of each of the strategies that you could potentially use. Again, we want to emphasize that these aren't mandatory by any means. I always encourage people to look to published discourse in their field. Look to the target journals that you want to be publishing in, or theses or dissertations if you're trying to finish those. Ones that have been accomplished by your colleagues or mentors or your POS committee members. So look at what's going on. If you see a lot of these strategies being accomplished by those people, especially the people that are going to be somehow evaluating you and your work, it might be a good indicator that you should include some of these similar styles and techniques. So this first goal incorporates drawing on general background and study-specific background, and maybe even restating some principal findings. So by drawing on general background here, we mean bringing in any kind of theoretical or empirical knowledge or any other relevant information really, with or without the use of referencing. So this may involve some references. This may just be general knowledge in the field. And we'll get to some examples of this in a second. So it might just be a sentence like, Smith et al. Found that this, and that stands alone. That doesn't necessarily support what you found or negate what you found, but it's maybe starting to build some kind of knowledge that helps frame your findings. You also may want to draw on study-specific background. Usually people don't harp on this too much, but you may want to just reiterate some relevant study specifics, like what methods did you use, which is particularly important if you use some kind of innovative or strange method that's typically not used in this like research. Maybe your approaches, your experimentation or procedures, your analysis, like we employed a particular statistical analysis to study blah, blah, blah. And you might even want to restate your research objective, because then what follows is what you found. You also may want to state your principal findings. You've already stated that in the results, but reiterating it one more time is not a bad idea. You again want to be able to summarize and come with a takeaway, I guess a takeaway message that your audience will have as they proceed to the rest of your discussion and conclusion. So these are authentic examples from published discourse from a variety of fields. So if you're not used to looking at a lot of different disciplines, articles, and publications, don't worry. Don't pay attention to the content so much. We're trying to be zeroing in on the functional language. And by that I mean, what's going on in the sentence? Okay, so what goal or what particular strategy is the author accomplishing? So try to look past the jumble or jargon that you might not understand. All right, so what's going on here, and how do we know that?
Well, they're setting up a practice, a common practice.
Okay, great.
And then saying why they think it's bad.
Yeah, exactly. So this is kind of similar to something we may, I mean, you could drop this in the introduction section and no one would think any differently. So again, think about the similarities of discussions and introductions as we go through this. This is absolutely general background. And what particular language alerts us to it being general background? It's not irrigation water.
Often.
Yeah, exactly. It's often used. So this particular method is often used with this. The follow-up sentence could be, however, we chose to analyze it a little bit differently. And so they're starting to kind of draw distinctions between what's going on generally, what's going on specifically in this particular study. Ooh, the pipes, wow. They're getting loud. Okay, so what's happening in this example? Can you see this, Dave? Probably not.
Yeah, I can see it fine. I blew it up on
Okay.
Presenter.
Okay. This also might be a little, okay, this might be a little bit tricky. I usually have at least some natural science people in the audience. Assayed means analyzed. This is a verb, to assay something, or to analyze, to analyze something. So basically, these subjects that we analyzed were significantly underexpressed, means they were significantly, this was a result of this particular study. Yeah, this, unless you know some of this terminology, it might be a little bit difficult. But the fact that they're pointing to their population, the analysis that was done, and what specific finding there was, means that this is kind of a restatement of a major finding that they already reported in their results. And this might be a distillation of what could have been multiple paragraphs in their results as well. So moving on to the next goal, we're framing principal findings. We've already maybe restated what those major or the major finding was from the study. So now we're going to try to frame the principal findings. And here we're doing that potentially through a number of strategies: explicating, accounting for results, relating to expectations, and maybe even addressing limitations. So this is, when I give this series or this lecture in the series, it's typically preceded immediately by the results section. And so what we talk about is, this should probably sound familiar to some of the categories that you may see in a results section. And the major difference is that in results sections, if you see some explication of findings or slight interpretation, especially if you have distinct results in discussion sections, that's going to be within the study, or remarking about what these findings may mean within the study. Once you move to discussions and conclusion, this is already projecting outside the study and trying to make meaning of this beyond the study. Okay, so these specific strategies involve, most of these are mostly interpretation. So explicating results shows what the results mean in the broader context of your field. Accounting for results is where you start to deliberate on the nature of your findings, or what may have caused the results. So this could have led to, or been affected by, been influenced by, and if you're talking about qualitative data, if you have like interview or survey data, for example, these perceptions could have been influenced by, or may have been impacted by, blah, blah, blah. And you're probably going to see a lot more language like, that's what we call hedging language or softening language. May have been, could have been.
Seems to be,
appears. It is possible that, instead of saying outright, something that you might see more in the engineering disciplines and those publications, this is a fact. Because we don't know, because we're trying to get closer to the answer in a lot of qualitative research, and you can't touch the answer like you can in some other studies, you have to start to speculate around it. And so we use that type of terminology to talk about what may have caused it. We also may want to relate these to expectations. And this could be expectations that we had at the beginning, like hypotheses. Are these anticipated findings? Was it a surprise to us? We use words like interestingly or surprisingly, we found this. And so this is, again, part of making meaning or making interpretations of these findings. And we also may want to acknowledge the limitations of the study. So to avoid overgeneralizations, again, important in both qualitative and quantitative research, we're trying to ward off criticism from our colleagues, our committee members, people in our disciplinary community, or reviewers of these potential journal articles. All right, let's take a look at some examples of this. Even though we may not know what certain words are, you can insert your own content here. These results indicate, or could possibly indicate, that surface tension may be essential for hysteresis. So we obviously know interpretation is happening. And at this point, this is kind of making meaning beyond just this study itself. So these results indicate that this may be an essential thing for a broader phenomenon. Okay, so they're starting to make meaning projecting outside of their particular study. Indicate that, suggest that, demonstrate, illustrate, show. These are all very, very highly used reporting verbs. Okay, what about this?
Limitations.
Limitations. Why is it limitations?
Drawback.
Yep. An obvious drawback of this study is, so do you commonly report limitations in your work as well?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Yeah. And again, that serves the function of being transparent. I know that this study isn't the end all be all. I know there's work that needs to be done. I couldn't do it all. In fact, here were some problems that I had. The sample was small, the blah, blah, blah. And so you might go through a few. These are going to be more important, obviously, to list in a thesis or dissertation, and you might spend a little bit more time on those than you would in a research article. You still want to include them, but you don't want to highlight them. You're not trying to pass a defense anymore, which is something the committee is, they're looking for you to be able to call out your mistakes or areas for improvement, but still to include potentially in a research article publication. Okay, then we also can move on to reshaping the territory, where we talk about this comparison contrast with previous research. And this is where we support with evidence or we counter with evidence. And we talk about evidence in terms of data. Okay, so we show how relevant previous research or theoretical knowledge may support the claims that we made based on our reported results or findings. Or we juxtapose dissimilar results with something that's been previously reported. So it's not only something that's been previously found, this could also kind of go against a theoretical perspective or a paradigm or a research paradigm, or any kind of assumptions, predictions, well-known or kind of generally accepted theoretical beliefs. We want to make sure that we're calling out, we recognize that this is dissimilar from something that's happening in the field, and we're calling attention to that. Again, part of this whole transparency thing. This is a process of elimination here, I guess, because there's only two of them. But what language alerts us to what's going on here and what's happening here?
Contradicts.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, you can see.
I know.
Right, this is countering with evidence. And why is this countering with evidence? Well, you already said.
It contradicts.
Yeah, contradicts, that exact word. One finding of the current study is this, comma, which contradicts current thinking. And this person reviewed it. Okay, so it's also completely valid to be able to say current thinking doesn't support our view, but we're still presenting these results and recognizing that this is how we're building on knowledge in the community. Again, a process of elimination here can kind of tell us what this may be, but how do we know?
Close.
Yep, exactly. So again, even though we don't know that this could be a verb in this sense or what it might mean, this maps close to, or this yields a result that is close to our male specific, whatever, the specific subject. And then we move on to establishing additional territory. Now, if you have a completely distinct conclusion section, you're going to see a lot of this in the conclusion section. And sometimes your conclusion section may involve this plus limitations. Limitations can kind of go either way. Some people have it in the discussion, some have it in the conclusion. It's a rhetorical choice. And again, look to what's going on in the field to make sure you know where you're wanting to place these. So establishing additional territory involves, one, generalizing the results, possibly. So you're developing generalizing claims by maybe summarizing or synthesizing. You're making deductions to broaden the scope, okay? You also may be stating the importance or the value and demonstrating its noteworthiness of a particular finding, or not only of a finding, but maybe of your study, your contribution, what your study is contributing to the field at large. maybe you say something like, this is the first study ever to whatever. Or we used an innovative approach to blah, blah, blah. Novel, new, innovative. Words like this really point to these value statements. Also, there's a noting implications category that most people have in their disciplines. Do you guys have an implications section? Okay. So this basically shows how results could be applied more broadly to not only research and academia, but also practice, theory, and they may even indicate potential consequences. Okay, so these meanings or this new information could have an impact on blah, 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 or could be incorporated into future whatever. There's a little thing on that computer. I don't know if it's
it just popped up the 10-minute mark. But we can restart it if we need.
Okay, all right. Okay, and then there's also a potential.
Okay.
Oh, that's okay. I wanted to make sure it wasn't gonna like shut down.
It is.
Oh,
That's exactly what's happening.
So what kind of implications do you typically see in your discipline, or who would these implications be for that you're seeing in publications in your field?
Retailers, business owners.
Oh, okay. So that sounds like this practice category, retailers, business owners. Okay. Is anybody planning to go into academia where you're talking about what future research? Okay. So here you would say, if somebody researches this again, or this is what this is going to mean to the research field at large. It could also have, implications on theory, but it sounds like this might be a key one in your discipline. And then there's also the potential for you to propose future directions. And this is where you talk about future work or what you would like to see happen in order to expand this knowledge that you've contributed to the field. So it calls for some kind of a continuous generation of more knowledge based on what you found. And I'm sure you've seen calls for future research in your conclusion or discussion sections too. Okay. Yeah, I never know with certain audiences, you never know who's going to have particular elements and who won't.
She's back.
Hi.
I'm back.
Okay, so now we're going to look at this example and try to determine what's happening here and why do we think this particular function is happening.
In future directions.
Okay, so what calls our attention to that? Yeah, there's a couple things here. There's must be expanded and developed because the question hasn't been finally solved still. I don't think I even underlined that, but that's a huge part of it. There's this question that still remains unexplored, and that's a big part of it. Yeah.
That's a direct quote. Has not been finally solved still. That is terrible.
Well, believe it or not, we came across some pretty wonky publications with wild grammatical errors. In some disciplines, the idea is like, get out that knowledge quick because I'm going to be scooped. And so in that case,
They don't edit it?
Well, they edit it, but they only, these people they might not be paid to edit, or it might be edited by somebody who it's, in a lot of engineering fields, it's not necessarily native speakers of English who are doing the editing. And so has not finally been solved still. I mean, we know it's incorrect. It feels wrong, right? But it could easily pass. Yeah, I can see how it could potentially pass. Yeah. Not all published research is well edited. All right, what about this? And this one isn't a common, this particular strategy isn't common in a lot of disciplines.
It's the results.
It's basically the results, but there's this expansion happening here.
How do you know?
So thus indicates that. So this is kind of a move where they're talking about building from this small population that they sampled to a bigger population. So this is where they're talking generalization or generalizability. And they're usually, this isn't very common. This generalizing step, it happens in some disciplines, but it's not very common. And especially in qualitative research, we don't see a lot of trying to make meaning for huge populations because we're sampling smaller populations. Or even if we sampled what we think is a representative population, we got to be careful with the claims that we're making for bigger groups. So the study thus indicates that there is considerable, so this is it indicates that something bigger is happening within a larger population. What about this? This is pretty bold. What's going on here?
Is it valued because it's the first ever?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, so the first ever. This is new, it's innovative. This is the first, or this is the best. This is the most effective technique. So these are all statements that argue the value or importance of this current work, or maybe a particular finding. Again, I don't personally use a lot of these. I hedge it a lot more in my own writing. I'm also in a social science, and so I hedge my value statements more. This study contributes to growing body of knowledge on blah, blah, blah. That's still a value statement, but less
Dramatic.
chest beating. Okay, so we have a couple examples in your handout here for you to kind of look through, and we're paying attention to particular language that's being used. So using the strategies and goals, and I'm sorry, Dave, I don't have the handout here.
Okay, I texted it to him.
Oh.
Dave, did you get it? I texted it to you.
Oh, did you? Wait, where's my phone?
You just took a screenshot. Oh,
We've done this before.
okay.
Got it.
So I'll give you guys a couple minutes to kind of look through, and I highly encourage you to use the cheat sheet here, the breakdown of the goals and strategies, to try to figure out what's happening in some of these studies, and maybe even underlining or circling the language that tells us this.
You right there, babe?
I just printed it.
Just making a margarita. No big deal.
If my printer ever goes. It's printed as a picture. It's going to take like half an hour to print.
I could also maybe do this. I don't know if that helps.
Take a screenshot.
Do you mind if I have a little lemonade?
Of course not, please.
Just imagine like the printer being like this for
It's
all.
like it's the dot matrix. Malevolent creativity.
I know. What do you think about
That's
seeing all this different
Very dramatic.
writing from different
What
fields?
is
You
malevolent
start to pay attention to
creativity?
your own writing. your own discipline. Let's go ahead and start taking a look at these, and everybody can just kind of chime in as we go here. I'm sorry I didn't give you very much time to look at that, Dave.
It's okay.
So what's going on in this first sentence, or what could potentially be going on? And remember that there's not every sentence is assigned to one particular function. There could be lots of things happening in a given sentence, and depending on the author's experience or level of complexity too in the writing. So what's happening in this example?
Well, it says it's consistent with other reports, so they're comparing it to other studies.
Yeah, absolutely. So it's showing how other studies support your findings, or showing how your findings support other studies, both. You're using evidence from the field, so consistent with other reports.
So it's goal 1?
Oh, sorry, no, goal 3.
Okay.
Yep, that's a mistake. Oh, good catch. Attention to detail. All right, what about this next example?
I said this was goal 1.
Okay, and why do you think that that's?
That they're just reiterating the study specifics.
Yeah, absolutely. This is very much study-specific background, and it's not uncommon to see, especially when you're talking about the goal of this study was the objective we set out to accomplish, or we attempted, aimed. Words like this showed what the initial target was, and then things that follow, the sentences that follow might support whether that target was achieved or not. So yeah, in this study, this was carried out in two very different areas. So this is kind of a reiteration of what happened methodologically.
In my dissertation,
Sure.
No, I'm just saying, so in my dissertation so far, I literally have this sentence at the beginning of like all of my chapters. Because,
Really?
well, like, because the lit review is so long,
Mhm.
and I want them to remember what the purpose is that I mentioned in the first chapter. So I put it again at the top of the method section.
Okay.
And the method section is so long, so I put it again at the top of the results section.
Yep.
And then at the top of the discussion section,
Mhm.
it'll go, because then we're jumping into the discussion.
Yep, exactly. you can say it in different ways. The current work did this, and our study and this study, we, I, depending on, you may say we or I, depending on if.
They go back and forth.
Okay. Yeah, some disciplines are very accepting of it, some are not,
Are you?
but that's a good strategy.
Where are I?
I don't know yet.
Yeah.
Does anyone?
I've stuck
else
with
have
the
an opinion?
researcher so far, which I hate, but that's what I've.
And I usually err on taking the agent out altogether and just putting in passive voice, which is more common in my field. But again, publications and new trends in some publications and journals are starting to see we and I, like those subject-specific pronouns being inserted. So we're seeing that more and more in social sciences. All right, what about in this example? The 3 personality traits expected to explain this. Only trait aggression actually did it. So there may be a couple things happening.
To be guessed.
Okay, go for it.
Goal 3, reshaping.
Okay, you think it might be goal 3.
Because you say all the 3 personality traits, blah blah blah, and then the other 2.
So I think maybe.
Trait aggression actually did this.
Mhm. And this might be part of a little confusing part too. Expected to. Well, what we see here mainly is its relation to an expectation of the author. But I see how you may have interpreted that as an expectation of someone else, or maybe some kind of knowledge, I don't know, that already exists, and maybe you're supporting or negating it with evidence. But here, this is mainly, they expected to find this, and only one trait that they actually researched actually followed through. So this is relating to expectations. And then there's a follow-up here after the semicolon. The other two may potentially shed light on something else. So this is an explication or another interpretation beyond the study. Okay, what about this? This is.
I said goal 4.
Okay.
And I went back and forth between stating the value and noting implications.
Okay. Yeah, that's kind of and it could be valuable because of the implications that are there too. So value can arrive in a lot of different ways, or it can arise from the text in different ways. But mainly because of, therefore, these periods might be of particular importance for interventions, for practice. So in practice terms, we should probably heed these study results when we're considering future interventions. And then this is the last example here. So what's going on in this example, or may be happening in this example?
Well, they're restating their finding.
Mm-hmm.
First part.
Yep. And then what's happening here?
Suggesting.
Yeah.
Oh, is that
Yeah.
generalizing? No, explain.
That's kind of like suggesting that, indicating that, demonstrating that. And this is, I also want to highlight, this is a very common construction that you might even see in results sections. If you have combined results and discussion sections, this is a beautiful way to segue from maybe a quote that you've integrated from your qualitative analysis into what this could mean. So this could possibly suggest that, or meaning that, representing that, illustrating that. So the comma and then suggesting that, that really transfers very nicely into your interpretation of these results. So this is just kind of a rundown summary of these particular communicative goals that we've covered today. But I did want to note that it's clear that different strategies can be combined, and we saw that already in some of the examples, to achieve certain communicative effects. So as readers, we need to be looking at published work, or the type of work that we want to be producing, and figuring out what these authors that we think are good authors are doing, and potentially adopt some of these strategies. So they're not all mandatory. You may have seen some things today, you're like, I've never seen it before, probably not going to incorporate it. So definitely don't just incorporate it because I presented on it. Make sure that you're seeing this in your field and it's relevant to your particular study. The use of the strategies obviously depends on your disciplinary conventions, sometimes even depends on target journal conventions. So again, if you're looking in particular journals, you have to look at their guidelines and what their expectations are to figure out how you're going to meet them or how your writing's going to match it. And again, something we really emphasize is that in order to be a critical and effective writer, you have to be a critical and effective reader. So you have to look to see what's going on in your field. You have to know the context in order to be able to adjust to it and to reproduce writing that's effective within that context. And that takes time. Some of these are also on this handout too. Actually, all of these are on the handout. These are just some additional tips. So make sure that your discussion connects clearly with the literature and with that niche that you identified in the introduction section. We've seen sometimes that discussion conclusions don't connect to the introduction. That's not good. You need to have the thread kind of weaving throughout your entire research article and making sure that it draws their clear connections between the intro and the discussion. And if it's been a long time since you wrote your intro, definitely reread it and make sure that you're incorporating some of those same elements back in your discussion or conclusion. Check for a close fit between your research purpose, your questions, hypotheses, and what you think the most important findings are. Because again, if you're seeing major mismatch, and it's possible that you could have started writing this 5 months ago and now you're finishing it. That's okay. You know, we're grad students and we have lives and things happen in between, and maybe we were collecting or analyzing data. But again, going back to that introduction and our purposes are going to help ground our discussion. Support your explanations and claims, obviously with relevant citations, and extend the discussion to include any kind of controversies where it's appropriate. So again, we want to make sure that we are acknowledging those potential controversies if they're there. So negotiate also the strength of your claims with appropriate verb choice. So for example here, again, we've talked about hedging already. The presence of this demonstrates that blah, blah, blah. This is a lot more strong than something like the presence of IRE motives suggests that this element may be stabilized. So these are clearly conveying a similar point, but the tone and the strength with which they're conveying this point is different. And you can feel the difference, and we know that it's different because of the verb choice. So make sure that you're making verb choices that are appropriate to how tentative you are or how confident you are with the claims that you're making. We want to avoid just repeating our results. They read our results maybe, but if they did read our results, we don't want to just reiterate what the results were. We want to highlight what's most necessary. We want to avoid poor judgments. So neither overestimating or underestimating not only our findings, but also the previous findings we're building on. We want to avoid including results that are presented but not analyzed. This happens a lot. Somebody presents it, they put it in a table, they don't talk about it. It's still there, folks. You know, we need to make sure that we acknowledge that it's there and we're commenting on it. And we're interpreting it and discussing it as well. Avoid disregarding some previous research by misrepresenting or refusing to include it in the discussion. It's better that you do than if you don't, especially for your whole credibility, basically, as a researcher. And also avoid overemphasizing your study's limitations by over-recommending or overusing recommendations for future work. You can tie them together, but just make sure you don't underscore, I guess, those future recommendations by kind of sweeping over your limitations. Okay. This is just another, if you would ever want to meet with a writing consultant, you're more than able to. Everyone can meet with one once a week or more if you need to. Has anyone ever met with a writing consultant? You have? Who have you met with? Oh, okay. Is it one of the people here or not? Okay. Oh, it might not be in our center either. If it's in, so we're not the Writing and Media Help Center. We only cater to grad students.
It was the one that opened for grad students. So
Oh, yeah.
We
So-
go as part of GetFed, right?
Oh, yeah.
In Carver?
Yeah, this is, we're in Pearson, but yeah, I think Holly and Karen have been recommending people to go. But anyway, if you want to go to a free writing consultation session, then there's actually 14. This is an old picture, but there's actually 14 of us now, and we are always willing to give people feedback.
And
Your
you'll
writing.
read our writing and say you're missing a link
So-
between X and Y.
So it's less a diagnostic tool and more of a, what do you want to work on? Like, so you go in with questions, you're like, I have some questions about how I'm building up my conclusion, or I'm not really sure, I'm at a point where I don't know if this is clear, if this discussion is, is coming across clearly, am I being too, I don't know how to proceed with something. So they won't go through the whole section, they can't, because it's only an hour each, but they will give you, if you come in with questions, they'll be willing to talk to you. And it's really helpful. I mean, I've done it myself actually when I was finishing up my dissertation and kind of gone to some different people to get feedback. Sometimes it just helps to talk too. We've had people who were just like, I'm getting ready for my prelim defense and I need some help. And so we'll look at PowerPoints too.
Oh,
Yeah. Or poster presentations, grant proposals, not just research writing. All right. So I'm not going to email you an evaluation, but please let me know if you have any questions.
question?
Yeah, I
Yeah,
actually have.
You look like you do.
Sure.
But I'm hesitating to ask.
No.
What if you're new to writing and
Sure.
you really want to outline of how you want to will I be able to get an appointment?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, some people come and they have nothing. They come and they honestly sit and talk and just brainstorm if they're at the very beginning stages of their writing process. We've had people come in with fully finished drafts, come in with nothing but ideas, come in with kind of barely structured ideas. So seriously, anything in between will be, and you can go and try it. It's free, so you can try it at least for a session if you think it's helpful. But outlining is a great tool, and there are several consultants that would be able to help you with, getting to the point where you're at least getting a structure down. You get the bones down before you start filling in the flesh. And so, so I think that would be a good strategy.
Thank you.
Sure.
How about today you spoke about the discussion, conclusion, but how about you want to begin the introduction?
Oh,
That's
yeah.
where I'm at there. What's this? I'm just so things like that.
So you're mentioning more about your introduction part of your
I'm just
research?
beginning. So
Okay.
will I be able to get help with that?
Sure. Oh, yeah. Absolutely. Yeah. Just because I presented on discussions and conclusions today doesn't mean that people can't, help you with other
I should
parts.
say we chose that.
Yeah.
So they also do seminars on introduction, literature review, and methods.
Yeah, but I'm just saying from the outline, from the outside, if you could give it, will somebody be able to say, okay, this is how you need to write?
They will.
Completely new to writing.
They will not say this is how you need to write, but they'll say, let's look at some work in your field together, and they will help give you the skills to kind of like read through, and because it's going to eventually end up being up to you, like what you're gonna be the one who goes out and continues to like see these different publications and see like, oh wow, this person does this all the time, and now you're noticing all these strategies. Now that you know that some of these strategies exist, believe me, I can't look at something and not see the function of it anymore, like writing, because after being through, going through so much writing, you start to see rhetorically what's happening and how well it's being built up. So if you sit down with someone, then they could absolutely help you start to see those functions. Yeah, definitely. Do you want this link again?
No, I haven't.
Okay, great. Okay, great. Any more questions?
No, this was very helpful.
Good. Wow, I'm glad. Okay, so
I think so.
yeah, I can definitely give you guys I'm going to be presenting pretty much the same content to a lot of different grad students on next Monday, not next Monday, the following Monday. And that's going to include like, I don't know if you're familiar with Panopto, Dave, but it's it's basically a video recording and audio recording system that also captures the slides on the screen. So you can see kind of in a similar way, you can see like a little picture of the speaker talking, but the main emphasis is on the slide. So that'll be freely accessible to anybody at Iowa State too. We're doing that just starting this year for distance students in particular.
Cool. That's great.
Yeah,
we can technically do
Probably next time. Wonderful. Thank you so much.
Yeah, no problem.
Thanks, Sarah.
Oh, no problem. You want to chat for a little bit, or you got to run?
I can chat for a few minutes.
Okay.